You can do like dump designing here. You could, like the most useful one is a radial dump creation, but you've got some other things here that you can use. Now what we're going to use is, because we're doing a standard just open pit waste dump, it's just going to be built, you know, bottom up in different lifts. We need to create the blocks that represent those lifts.
Right.
So we're going to use a couple of different tools to do that. But primarily what we're going to do is create a solid for the waste dump, which represents the entire waste dump. Then we're going to put a grid over the top of it, and then we're going to use a function called split by or cut by blocks and benches. And then what that does is that allows us to split the design up into different lift heights and then use the grid to cut it, and then we end up with a load of volumetric solids which we then dump the material into. So the first thing we want to do is create the solid for that waste dump.
Right.
So you do that in the same way as you would do for a pit, basically. So you need to create a surface first.
Yeah.
Of the
So
waste dump.
I think it's on the draw. What was it? The tessellate.
That's it.
Such a weird.
But what you want to do is you need to be in the layer control first, because you need to.
Yeah, they need to go somewhere, I suppose.
You need to create a surface underneath the. What I normally do is put surface underneath the design.
Right.
Because then you've got the strings, the surface, and the solid. So if you add one, I'll just call it surface.
Right.
And double click it and make sure it's active. That's it. And then if you do the tessellate, that you were going to do.
Okay, so let's tessellate. And I can select the layer, I suppose. This is what entity
No, it's going to do everything. So
it's
you
even gonna
so
okay.
do select the safest way is to
it's
use
active layer.
well, it's not actually. The safest way is to do selected layers, because then you know exactly which layer.
Right. Okay.
But you're actually, remember, this is the data you're tessellating from. So remember the data's on that one. That's it.
Okay.
So this is asking you what data do you want to tessellate.
Of course. Yeah.
And then you can use a boundary if you want to.
Right.
If you click that just to test it, and then just click OK. It's going to ask you what. Select the polylines as the limiting boundary. So if you zoom in, that's it. Select that one. Then right click. There you go.
Okay.
And if you create another layer under surface called solid, this is a good destination to put the solid.
Right. Yeah.
And then you want to,
And you created it from the topography, I presume so.
Exactly, yeah. So
okay, so we need that one. And then we have to combine these two somehow.
Well, all you do is we're just going to create the solid between the two surfaces.
Right.
So if you go draw solids, there's one down there that says between selected surfaces.
Right.
It lets you select the upper surface and then the lower surface. And then it asks you where are you going to put it. That's right. And you can, if you isolate the solid, you can click on it, and then you see, if you want, you can right click and validate to make sure it's valid. So if you go modify solids validate, you want to check if it's a closed solid. That's correct. Double check, and it says OK. So it's an OK solid. So that's good.
Cool.
And we can save if you want. So it's good to save after every. Sometimes it crashes when it's doing the Boolean stuff. So.
Yeah. Okay. Looks good.
So now, what we need to do is we're going to split this up on benches and on a grid. So you can create the grid first if you want to.
Mhm.
Same way as you did the mining grid.
Yeah, I was just thinking, was it in here or in
It was in the on the draw.
draw? Yeah, draw. And,
Regular grid.
somewhere below.
But you want to remember, you need to
Yeah.
make a new layer with the grid. What
With
the
the
grid's
grid
going to
in.
go into.
Yeah. Okay.
'Cause
Now
you've got the old grids
what
there.
kind of blocks do you want to split it on? We could
well.
use the old grid, I presume. Oh, it's not in the right place.
Well, if you go,
But we can add a new one
you
here.
can
I
add a new
suppose.
one there, exactly. You can do it 100 by 100 again if you want, but you could do it a rotated one this time if you wanted.
Okay.
Yeah, and then make sure it's active. So double click on it. That's it.
Mhm. Right. So something like that, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Measuring was somewhere here, wasn't it? Or
It's
you
okay,
would just say
if you just
45
go,
degrees.
if you just go draw,
Yeah.
go back to draw,
Okay.
and then regular grid manually. So then what this is asking you is you can select the bottom left corner and then the azimuth of the
right, yeah.
grid. So if you click pick, and you select like maybe down here, yeah, that's it, and then click up there, something along there, about that, yeah. Right?
Right.
And then if you click apply now, there you go, you've got that sort of grid like that, right?
Yeah.
That looks okay, that's good enough. So if you click OK now, then you've got now this grid that's been created.
Mm. Right. Okay. And for creating the blocks,
For creating the blocks, it's actually not through these functions. We use a Boolean function.
right. Okay.
So if you go to modify, solids, yeah, and then you've got cut,
Right.
and then you've got blocks and benches.
Okay.
You make this a bit bigger. What you've got under here is it's asking you. We're basically going to build this lift by lift. So if you think about it, at the bottom you've got the lower lift, right?
Mm.
Because the topography is variable, it's not a fixed lift height, is it? Because
Yeah.
where the top is high, the lift is going to be small. Where the top is low, the lift is going to be high. But in the middle, where you've got a flat bench and then you're building flat lifts, all the lifts are going to be the same height. And then at the very top, often you'll have the same lift at the top, but you want to make sure that you encompass the entire lift. So normally what you do is when you're doing the cutting the blocks and benches, you're splitting them into the lower lift, the middle lifts, which might be many, and then the upper lift. So we're going to have 3 lines in here, right?
Okay.
So if I show you how to do this, if you do it and I'll talk you through it.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So we do
the first
what,
one, lift
lower
position-
first.
Yeah,
or-
exactly. So yeah, lift. I normally call it like lift 1.
Okay.
The blocks grid.
So that's the one we created.
Yeah.
That's that one.
Yeah. Now you can, if you don't have a grid, you can just do
Yeah,
a fixed
yeah.
one and it'll calculate it for you. Close solids layer.
Obviously, then it will only be north, south,
Exactly.
east, west. Yeah. The close solid is the one that we created.
Yeah. Filtering is if you had multiple dumps and you wanted on the same layer and you wanted to only cut one of them, you can filter for one of the dumps.
Right.
Grouping attributes, we don't need that either. Right, outputs, cut solids layer. So what I would do is I'd select that, and under, if you scroll down underneath the waste dump design, if you do solid, right, and click OK. Now if you click at the end here, double click, right, then you can edit the name. So at the end
Right.
do backslash, and then you can, if you do blocks, right,
Yeah. Okay.
and press enter or click away or something, right? Now delete existing, what that's going to do is if there's anything on that blocks layer, it'll delete it. So because we're going to have multiple lines,
Yeah.
keep
yeah.
that ticked on for now on the
Yeah.
first one, but then the later ones will tick it off.
Yeah.
So it resets. We're not inverting. Right, benches. Attribute name, yeah, bench, that's fine. Use maximum RL. No. Oh, that's actually a new one they put in there. So height. Right now, because we're doing the first lift, it's asking us what is the minimum RL, what's the maximum RL of the lift, and what are the lift heights. So for example, you've got minimum RL 0, maximum RL 100, lift height 20. That's going to put 5 lifts in there, right? But what we're interested in is, if we look at the very first lift, okay, make sure we've got snapping onto nearest. We go tools, query, point, right? That Z is 470.
Yeah.
So the upper level of our first lift is actually 470. Then the lower part down here is about 448, right? But just to make sure we definitely encompass everything, let's make the minimum RL 400.
Right. Yeah.
And we're going to create a single lift for the lower lift, and we're going to make that 70 meters. It's basically looking from 400 to 470 and making one lift out of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. The other things at the end, we don't need to do any of this, right? Now what we're doing is we're adding another one in here. It actually copies everything.
That's this one.
Yeah. And you go lift 2. Now it's all the same, apart from we don't want to delete existing, and now our lift heights are, well, what are they? I can't remember. Do you want to just check what they are? I don't know what they are.
Let's see.
480, so...
Yeah, 480. So it should presumably be 10 meters.
Yeah, they're 10 meters, yeah. Now what's the upper height that we go to? $520.
Yep.
So let's go one bench above. So we'll go to 530.
Right, okay.
So
And your final lifts.
yeah. Well, in this
Well,
case,
well,
because we've got a regular final lift, because it's the
Yeah.
same height, we don't need to do a third. We can
Right,
just
okay,
incorporate
yeah.
that
Yeah,
into the
okay,
lift
that's
too.
fine. Okay, so this one would go from 470
Yeah.
to 530.
Yeah. That looks good. That's good. So now, if you scroll to the left, all the way, and just make sure we've got them both ticked on to use, yeah. So now if we move this up a bit and we just click OK, it should run it. Yeah, if you click OK, you've got this open, so you need to close that, yeah, for it to run. It's also using the grid that you've made to chop it up into all the blocks. Okay, so you click close, and then go to layer control and isolate those blocks that you've just created. And here they are. So you click on it, for example, and you can see one of them. There you go. Now, the way to check this is if you interactive filter the blocks on bench level.
Yep. So. What you do?
Right click on the layer. That's
right
it.
click on the layer.
Interactive
okay.
filter. And then you should have an ID and a bench. So you go with bench, yeah. And then order the benches by
Right,
clicking.
so this is a very bottom one.
Well,
Yeah,
click on that, yeah. There you go. That's the bottom layer. And if you hold down Control, so you click on 400.
And you've got more.
Yeah, and then hold down Control, and then you can add them up, and then you can see how the dump is building, and you can see, there you go. So now we've got them all the blocks to then basically fill with waste material. You can save them if you fancy. Right. So you would do the same if you had any stockpiles, like subgrade stockpiles or something like that. Now we do have a subgrade stockpile in this one, but we won't bother for now. It's just the same. So what we need to do now is we need to develop the haulage paths. Now the way that the haulage works in Deswick is that you basically have a haulage path which runs from the base of each of the cutbacks all the way up to the final destination. So for example here we've got one waste dump and we've got 4 cutbacks.
Mhm.
So you would, for example, have a single line that went from here up the pit design.
Mhm.
It has to have points on the bench levels, so that's
Right.
why we need the contours.
Mhm.
These contours would need to be used.
Right.
And it would run here. You could run it, you just snap to the topography surface until you get to this point, and then you need a contour of the waste dump as
Mhm.
well, and then you snap to the 10-metre bench levels on the waste dump, and you finish. Normally you would finish here at the top.
Right.
Okay. Now that is a whole road, as I like to call it. Okay.
Mhm.
Now what the software then does is you create these things. The name's not very good, but they're called mining slot connectors. Now what that is, a slot connector is saying, or just a connector, maybe, forget the
Yeah.
word slot, it's a connector, is it's going to automatically connect the mining blocks on a particular level
Right.
to the point that exists on the haul road.
Yeah.
And you can limit how the connector joins the road. For example, it can only connect to a point within a vertical tolerance of 10 metres or something.
Okay.
Right? So what you do is you create the haul ramps, but I would recommend creating the haul ramps for one destination first. So for example, to the waste dump, okay?
Right.
Then you can use this string to create the mining slot connectors, which is basically going to connect all the mining blocks to that haul road. You also create dumping connectors. So this is at the other end of the line. It connects the dumping solids to points on this part of the
Path,
haulage route, right?
Yeah.
So the key point as well is where these blocks are allowed to connect to. So you create these other lines that are called limiting polygons. So for example, you don't want a mining block connecting to a road that's outside of the pit, right? Because although it might be a shortest distance,
Right.
obviously
Yeah.
it needs to connect to a ramp in the pit. So
Yep.
you can draw polylines which limit where the connectors for mining can connect. So it says basically anything outside of that polyline, the mining blocks cannot connect to it.
Yeah.
And the same thing for the dump. You say, well, any of the dump solids can only connect to the haul routes within the dumping limiting lines, right?
Yep.
And once you've got one of them done and you know that you're happy with how it's running, then you can physically copy and paste the haulage paths inside of the pits and then edit them from the pit crest to the other destinations, for example the crusher destination over here, because you need, it's not 100% required, but it's good practice, so everything within the pit is the same for each destination, because you need one line to take you to the waste dump, you need another line to take you to the crusher.
Yeah.
So the first step that I'd recommend is going through the process that you went through similarly with the dependencies, right?
Mhm.
But this time, when you
You can't cut corners and
yeah, but the way to do it, which I find the easiest, if I just give you a quick demo,
Mhm.
is so where's the cutback one? It's this one here, isn't it? Right. So if we've got we've got the surface of cutback one here. Under haulage, now we're not doing dependencies, right?
Mhm.
If I do one, if I call it like roads, right? And then we add in here, what I like to do is I like to do like version 1, cutback 1. Okay.
Mhm.
So in here, what I'm going to do first, I'm just going to snap to the pit base. Okay. Let's turn off the surface. Make sure we've got the contours on. Right. So I can click here. I can click here.
And then you insert points.
Yeah. Okay, now there's another thing to consider here is the mined out topography. So you put the topo on, you can see we're at this point now. Well actually, we now need to come out of the pit.
Mhm.
Right. And then now for keeping it simple, maybe we'll just come up here from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this just here, right?
Okay.
And then back down into the pit here. Obviously, this isn't the how the trucks would actually drive.
Mhm.
So if you click on this and go points, insert, make sure you're on there. You can basically snap to the
Onto the surface.
surface, right? And then you can actually sort of build something that's a bit
Yeah.
more
Realistic.
realistic. Yeah, that's a bit better.
Yep.
And then what we said before as well was about this being able to connect to things that are lower than itself. So what you could do here is you can reverse the direction. So now this is actually the end of it, right? And then what you can do is if you go modify polylines, well, first thing to do is to go tools, query, point, figure out where we are. We're at level 295, right?
Mhm.
So if we set our working plane to 295, right?
Mhm.
So our working plane is 295 now. Make sure that we maintain our Z elevation. Actually, is that what we want? What was it? No, I don't think so. Now, I'm going to go down 10 metres, so now my working plane is actually 285.
Alright, yeah.
Right, and if I go modify polylines, extend, interactive, okay, turn off any snapping,
Alright.
and if I click, right,
That should be below the
that
surface,
should
yeah.
be now 10 metres below surface,
Yeah.
which it is, you see? And then what I can do is, if that's then, you know, a quick check, which is always useful, is if you select it, right click, go label, selection, we can label the gradient.
Okay.
So if you look here, data that we want to show, let's show the gradient in percent. And I want to show it at the centre of each segment. And let's make the size like 8. Okay. So this is showing the gradient of each of the lines. Right. So you can see here that's minus 56. That's not particularly accurate, so I can always move it around a little bit. So let's have a little bit more. 10, 11%, something like that. So you can have a quick look, and obviously if it's around 10% for the majority of it, it looks fine to me. You know, there's nothing here, there's no major mess ups, we haven't like accidentally snapped to a point and made it, you know, made the gradient like 200% or something. So that is for cutback 1.
Yeah. So that's just the waist.
That's, well, yeah, that's sort of like cutback 1 to the pit crest at this point.
Yeah.
And then so what we need to do is now do the same again for cutback 2, etc., etc. So if you wanted to
sure.
have a go at that, and just give me a shout if you need any help with it. And
No
then,
worries.
and if there are roads which overlie each other, you can if you hold down Control when you're inserting points and click. I'll just show you quickly, just as an example.
Follow.
Yeah,
the
if you go,
line.
if I've got a line here, but if I click snap to points, if I hold down Control and click, it just automatically follows.
Right.
And if I click again,
Yes.
then that's actually, you know,